Over the next couple of days, we're going to be pulling and replacing the clutch in this Audi A6. Wish me luck. First thing we're going to do is unhook the battery, just in case we end up having to mess with the starter. Don't want it to short out on anything. Next thing we're going to want to do is remove the exhaust. I was going to undo these couplers, undo these mounts here, and then at that point take the O2 sensors out so they can free hang. Might want to label which one is which. Don't know if it matters, it might. And then we're going to have to unbolt it from the turbos, which is going to be up in there somehow, and may have to unbolt the heat shields for the axles to get to that, but we'll see as we go. Got those off and slid back. They were 17 millimeter. These next bolts are also 17 millimeter. You're going to need wrenches though, because it's kind of a tight spot. And then the O2 sensors should be 22 millimeter. Alright, so I was wrong about that 8mm screw clamp. That's just holding a heat shield. So we actually will need to pull the exhaust off from the back of the turbo. And in order to do that, we're going to have to gain some access to it, which will probably require pulling the axle out of the way, and also the heat shield that's covering the axle. The heat shield covering the axle appears to have two 6mm Allen bolts holding it in. Hopefully we can remove that, because right now I don't have the right tools to remove the axle. Hopefully we can just remove that and get enough space to pull the exhaust. We shall see. Turns out there's 3 bolts holding the heat shield in. The one at the top you really can't see. There's an access hole cut out right above the driver's side axle that you can see right there, that your extension's going to fit through with your 6mm Allen socket. It's the only way you're going to get it. So that Allen socket. And it goes up, and you can see it just barely. If you come towards the front of the car and look right above the axle, you'll be able to kind of see it and guide it in with your hand a little bit there, and then wrench on it from outside. Once you get the exhaust off of there, you got to unbolt the axles, and that's going to use an M10 or a triple square size 10. That's where our axle bolts are. You can impact it right through here and turn it, impact the next one, turn it, impact the next one, and then hit it with a hammer to knock it loose, and it should be good. After that, you're going to want to unbolt the drive shafts, which is happening now. What sizes do those use? A T45 and a T45, and then an Allen 8mm is what you're going to want for that. And then I think you take down the heat shields as well. That probably uses a 10mm, and they're in pieces, so it's easy to slide them out. Alright, next thing we're working on is getting the shift lever out. The way to do that is to pull this cover, first unscrew the shift knob, pull this cover off, pop this cover up. There's going to be 2 10mm right here that hold this bracket, and then you're going to go for these 4 10mm, and that should drop the whole shift linkage assembly down. That way you can pull the transmission down and not have the linkages get all caught up. Alright, at this point we have the drive shaft disconnected. We had to unbolt the center support bearing, which uses two 13mm studs with bolts on there, or nuts on there. And then just looking around the transmission here, we already dropped down the shift linkage box, and looking around the transmission we saw a connector up in there towards the passenger side that we disconnected. We haven't seen any more connectors obviously. Before we completely pull it down, we'll look again. And it looks like at this point we're going to start undoing actual mounts to try to drop this transmission down. Alright, got the transmission out. It's looking pretty oily. We ended up pulling the transmission mounts off the side of the transmission and also from the subframe and pulling them out. That way we had more clearance. We left the axles in. And yeah, unbolted that box. It came right down real easy. There were a couple of bolts, two bolts, not dead center, but just offset to each side of the center up here that held us up, but we couldn't see from underneath. But we were able to get them with a 3-inch extension and a 16mm socket and a nice ratchet with a cheater bar. We got those loose and taken out, and then the transmission slipped back real easy and came down for us. So a little cold today. Tomorrow we're probably gonna end up putting the clutch in and go from there. Alright, got the transmission out. A couple things to mention. Before you actually drop the transmission, there's a couple things you need to unhook. The first thing that I would think is probably the most important is going to be the crank position sensor, which is on the driver's side of the transmission. It connects right here with a 10mm bolt, pulls out, and then right here is where your clutch line is going to connect. Has a quick clip right here. You should be able to get it, pull this clip out from the side, and then the line will just pull straight out. Put the clip back in so you don't lose it. Then there's another connector on the passenger side, and that's right here, and it looks to be probably the reverse light switch. And there was this heat shield around the wire that goes to this, probably to protect it from the heat from the turbo. And then yeah, don't forget to unbolt your assembly to pull that out as well. Alright, we've got everything back together. There was a couple of things I failed to mention while actually doing the job. One of the big things is the 17 bolts or nuts on the back of the turbo for the downpipes are a pain, especially the top ones. They need to be accessed from above the car. On the driver's side, you're going to remove the water tank here, which is a couple of screws, pull that out of the way. Then when you got to look down in there, you'll be coming in from this way. There's a heat shield that's held on with 5mm Allens. The heat shield will be loosened up, the O2 sensor gets pulled out. The heat shield can move around but can't get pulled out, so you have to leave it in there, and there's a cutout in the heat shield that you can access the top 17mm nut on the back of the turbo. You're going to stick a wrench down there and you're going to have very little room. You might have to undo some connectors up in here so you have enough room. But if I ended up using an 11/16 instead of a 17. They should be the same size, but it had a little bit more play, and I was able to get the wrench in there enough and get my quarter turns on the boxed end side to actually loosen that up, pull it off. Very similar situation on the passenger side. 5mm holding that heat shield. You have to remove the airbox stuff, get it out of the way. You're gonna let the heat shield hang, pull the O2 sensor, but you also have an exhaust gas temperature sensor that comes out. That's 17mm. That'll pull out and just hang around. Pull the heat shield off with those 5mm, and you'll be able to access through the cutout in the heat shield that 17mm as well. A little bit more room on this side, but I still ended up using that 11/16 with that little bit more play just to make it come on. And then yeah, so when you're installing everything, it's obviously going to be the reverse of the uninstall. Make sure you follow the manufacturer's directions. on torque specs for your flywheel bolts or your pressure plate bolts. You know, use your alignment tool, all those things. All in all, this is the hardest clutch I've ever done, and it took about 3 days with help from friends, but we got it done. And if I had to do it again, I would, but I wouldn't volunteer for it.